A single dad offers directions to a lost tourist, only to discover she owns the five-star resort that just bought out half the town. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The morning began like most others in the Bennett household, quiet, hurried, and a little chaotic around the edges. The smell of toast mixed with the scent of motor oil that clung to Michael's work jacket hanging over a chair in the kitchen. He moved from counter to sink to fridge with practiced efficiency, buttering Lily's toast while sipping lukewarm coffee and eyeing the old wall clock that seemed to tick louder the more behind schedule they got. Lily sat at the small kitchen table, her legs swinging under the chair, munching on half a banana and scribbling in a worn sketch pad. She was still in her pajamas, unicorns and stars faded from too many washes, and her hair stuck out in all directions. Michael raised an eyebrow. "You plan on going to school in those, kiddo?" he asked, nodding at her polka-dot pajama pants. Lily grinned, not looking up from her drawing. "They're cozy." "They're also not dress code." She sighed dramatically, dropped her pencil, and slid off the chair with all the energy of a retired librarian. "Fine, but only because Mrs. Patterson gave me a warning last time." As she padded off to her room, Michael drained the rest of his coffee and checked the day's to-do list. Fix the Jenkins back fence, check on the Miller's busted water heater, and maybe, if he had time, patch the hole in his own roof before the next rain. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, feeling the scratch of stubble and the familiar weight of a life that never seemed to slow down. Lily returned dressed, hair brushed with suspicious efficiency, and backpack already slung over one shoulder. "Ready," she chirped. "Lunch?" Michael asked. "Check. Homework? Check. Toothpaste on your shirt?" She looked down, groaned, and raced back to change. Michael laughed softly and headed to the truck to start it up. By the time they were on the road, the heater barely working, and the windows fogged around the edges, Michael glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. She was humming to herself, oblivious to the mounting bills, the leaky roof, and the worn tires under them. Somehow, that made it all feel a little easier. The road out past Ridgeway Curve was mostly forgotten by anyone who didn't live in town. It wound lazily through stretches of oak and pine, where cell phone signals went to die and old wooden fences lined fields long since abandoned. Michael had taken the back road on instinct, hoping to avoid the morning school traffic now that Lily had been dropped off with a kiss on the forehead and a reminder not to trade her apple slices for fruit snacks again. The sun was still climbing, casting long golden fingers across the frosted grass, when he saw the car. It wasn't just any car. It was a sleek, low-profile SUV, gleaming white with tires that looked more at home on a California boulevard than on cracked asphalt. Parked haphazardly on the gravel shoulder, it looked almost embarrassed to be lost out here. And standing beside it, pacing with one arm crossed tight over her chest and the other holding a phone high in the air, was a woman. She didn't look local. Michael slowed the truck as he approached, the crunch of gravel beneath his tires catching her attention. She turned quickly, eyes narrowing until she saw him, then softening with a mix of relief and uncertainty. She was wrapped in a tan coat that probably cost more than his monthly rent, boots clean despite the muddy ground, dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail. Definitely not from around here. "Need some help?" Michael called out, leaning his arm casually against the open truck window. She lowered her phone and gave a breathless laugh. "That depends. Can you teleport me to cell service and tell me where the Oak Hollow Resort actually is?" Michael blinked. "Oak Hollow? You're standing in it?" She frowned. "No, I mean the resort. It's supposed to be 5 minutes from here. I've circled this road twice." "That's because it's not off this road. You're a good 10 miles out of the way." She groaned, rubbing her temples. "Of course I am." Michael nodded toward her car. "Mind if I draw you a map?" She looked at him, hesitated, then offered a sheepish smile. "Honestly, I think I need a guide more than a map." Michael could have handed her a rough sketch on the back of an old receipt and driven off. That's what he'd done plenty of times before. Tourists came through all the time in the fall for the foliage, or in the summer when the river was full and the trails were dry. Most didn't wander this far out, though, and certainly none looking quite so polished. But something about her, maybe the way she looked at the winding road like it had personally betrayed her, made him pause. "You're not going to find it just by turning around," he said, stepping out of his truck. The cold bit through his flannel, but he barely noticed. GPS gets flaky out here, and the signs aren't much help unless you already know where you're headed. She sighed, exasperated. "I'm starting to believe that." Michael rubbed the back of his neck, then nodded toward his truck. "Tell you what, it's not far if you follow me. I'll drive ahead and get you back on the right track." She tilted her head, a hint of surprise flickering across her face. "You'd do that?" "I'd hate to read in the paper that some tourist froze to death 10 miles from luxury accommodations." He smiled faintly. "Besides, I was heading that direction anyway." That last part was a lie, but not one he felt guilty about. She hesitated for a moment, then gave a quick nod. "All right, deal. But if you disappear into the woods and I end up in some true crime podcast, I'm blaming you." Michael chuckled. "Fair warning, I'm more of a country playlist guy." They got back into their vehicles, and Michael led the way, glancing occasionally in the mirror to make sure she was still behind him. She followed closely, careful but confident, and within 10 minutes they were back on paved roads that curved toward the hills like ribbons. He slowed near the turnoff to Oak Hollow and pulled over, stepping out as she did the same. Her eyes followed the tree-lined drive leading up to the sprawling resort nestled between the hills. "There it is," he said. "Told you I'd get you there." She looked at him, gratitude softening her expression. "Thank you. I'd probably still be talking to pine trees without you." Michael had passed the entrance to Oak Hollow Resort plenty of times. It sat just beyond the rise, hidden behind rows of carefully manicured pine and a wrought iron gate that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. He'd never had a reason to go inside. Folks like him didn't. It was the kind of place people came to escape real life, not live it. So when the gate slowly opened and Olivia's SUV rolled in behind him, Michael hesitated. He pulled his truck into the circular drive, gravel crunching beneath his tires, then stepped out slowly, watching her come to a stop beside him. The building ahead of them wasn't a hotel. It was a mansion. White stone walls, tall windows that reflected the morning sun like polished glass, and columns that stretched toward the sky like something out of a southern estate novel. Everything about it said wealth, old deliberate wealth. Michael blinked. "This is Oak Hollow?" Olivia climbed out of her SUV, adjusting the strap of her designer bag like it weighed more than her shoulders could bear. "It's officially called the Hartley Estate. Oak Hollow's the guest wing. Most people just call the whole place that." He turned toward her slowly, brow furrowing. "Wait, Hartley?" She gave a small, almost embarrassed nod. "Olivia Hartley. You own this place?" She hesitated, then exhaled. "My family does. I manage it, for now." Michael stared at the pristine estate, then back at her. In the morning light, she looked even more out of place next to his rusty old truck than she had on the side of the road. But something about the way she stood, shoulders squared but tired, made her seem less like a millionaire and more like someone carrying a burden. "Well," he said after a beat, clearing his throat, "guess I brought you home after all." A smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Guess you did." Michael tipped his head slightly, trying to catch up with what just happened. He thought he was helping a lost tourist find her hotel. Turns out he'd just escorted the owner of the most luxurious property in the entire county. Michael leaned against the hood of his truck, arms crossed loosely, eyes scanning the wide courtyard in front of the Hartley estate. It was all smooth stone and perfectly trimmed hedges, the kind of place where even the silence sounded expensive. Olivia stood a few feet away, her keys dangling from one manicured hand, her other holding a phone that had long since lost its signal. He scratched the back of his neck. "So, you run this place?" She nodded slowly. "Day to day, yeah. I split time between here and Manhattan. I'm mostly on site for expansion and renovations right now." Michael gave a low whistle. "That's a long commute." "Private jet helps," she said without bragging. It was just a fact, but it landed between them like a dropped wrench. Michael nodded once, lips pressed into a line. He didn't have the luxury of skipping security lines or flying coast to coast in a leather chair. Most weeks he was lucky if his truck didn't need a new belt. "I'm guessing you don't need directions too often," he said after a beat. "Not usually," she replied with a sheepish shrug. "But I'm good at making things look put together. Less good at asking for help." "Sounds familiar?" he said, glancing down at his scuffed boots. "Except I usually get lost on purpose." That made her smile. They stood in that quiet for a few moments, the difference in their lives hanging unspoken between them. Olivia adjusted her coat, looking suddenly unsure. "I'm guessing you don't come up here often." "First time past the gate," Michael said simply. She turned to him, studying his face. "You knew who I was?" "Nope. Just saw someone stuck on the side of the road." Her expression softened, the edge in her eyes giving way to something more thoughtful. "Most people either ignore me or try to impress me. You didn't do either." Michael gave a slow shrug. "Wasn't trying to do anything. Just seemed like you needed a hand." She looked at him then, not like a CEO, not like a guest passing through town, but like a woman who hadn't heard honesty in a while. And Michael, for all his tools and tired hands, suddenly felt like he was standing on a completely different planet. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the tall evergreens that lined the estate drive. Michael pulled his jacket tighter around him as Olivia stepped away from her car and motioned toward a stone bench near the fountain. For a moment he hesitated. Everything about the place felt like it wasn't meant for someone like him. But she sat down first. No hesitation, no pretense. Just a woman with something weighing on her. So he followed. "I owe you more than directions," Olivia said after a quiet moment, her hands folded in her lap. "I wasn't completely honest with you earlier." Michael raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "I'm not just here to check on the resort," she continued. "I'm here for business. My family. We're expanding our portfolio in this region. More rural markets, small-town getaways, that sort of thing." Michael frowned slightly. "What does that mean, exactly?" Olivia's eyes met his, steady and clear. "It means I'm looking at properties to buy, restore, and fold into Hartley Estates. We already finalized one acquisition last week, an old inn, the Willow Glen." Michael blinked. "The Willow Glen? That's—" He stopped short, tension creeping into his voice. "That place is part of this town's history. It's been here since the 1800s. "I know," Olivia said, her tone not defensive but careful. "That's why we wanted it. The architecture's beautiful, the location is perfect, and with a little restoration, It's not just a building," Michael cut in. "That place hosts the Harvest Festival every fall. Weddings, fundraisers, retirement parties. It's the heart of Maple Creek for some folks." She winced, like she'd expected that response. "I didn't make the deal. My brother handled the purchase. I'm here to assess and smooth over the details." Michael looked away, jaw tight. "So what happens now? The place turns into a boutique spa with a valet stand?" She didn't answer right away. "That's the part I'm still figuring out," she said finally. "And before you ask, I'm not proud of everything that led us here, but I'm trying to make sure we do this right." Michael exhaled through his nose, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Guess this is more than a lost tourist story after all." Olivia gave a rueful smile. "Yeah, it usually is." By the time Michael pulled into his driveway that evening, the winter sky had turned to ash, tinged with streaks of fading gold. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, the weight of the day pressing against his chest like a slow, steady hand. He hadn't planned on meeting anyone like Olivia Hartley, and he definitely hadn't expected that the woman he helped on the roadside would be tied to the fate of a place that meant so much to so many, including his daughter. The porch light flickered to life as Lily opened the front door, bundled in a blanket with her socked feet peeking out beneath the hem. She waved and grinned like he'd been gone for days. That smile, wide and gap-toothed, was the only thing that cut through the haze in his mind. "Dad, you're late." "I know, Bug," he said, stepping out of the truck. "Ran into someone who needed directions." She followed him inside, where the familiar smell of something burnt wafted from the kitchen. The microwave blinked with a sad-looking bag of popcorn still inside. He gave her a look. "I tried to make a snack. Don't worry, I stopped it before it caught fire." "Progress," he said, ruffling her hair before kneeling to pull off his boots. "Hey, Lil, you still working on that project for school? The one about Maple Creek history?" She lit up immediately, scampering over to the kitchen table where her notebook was sprawled open. She pointed proudly to a crude but earnest sketch of the Willow Glen Inn, complete with ivy vines, twinkling lights, and a tiny stick figure she'd labeled Me, standing by the front doors. "I'm going to read about how Grandma got married there," she said. "Did you know they have a piano in the ballroom? I want to play it someday." Michael swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the page. "Yeah, I remember." The thought of that sketch turning into nothing more than a memory stung. If Hartley Estates came in swinging with velvet ropes and champagne fountains, what would be left for Lily? For any of them? He stood slowly, heart heavy, and glanced out the window toward the horizon where the estate sat behind the hills. Some instinct in him stirred, protective, fierce, and certain. This wasn't just business, this was personal. It started with a knock. Michael had just set a pot of spaghetti on the stove when he heard it. 3 short raps against the front door, light but sure. Lily perked up from her spot on the couch, where she was half buried under a blanket with her sketch pad in her lap. "Are we expecting someone?" she asked, crayon still in hand. "Nope," Michael said, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He opened the door to find Olivia Hartley standing on his front step, her coat buttoned tight against the cold, a small, cautious smile on her face. The porch light caught the shine of her earrings, too elegant for this part of town, but her posture was relaxed, hands tucked in her pockets like any other neighbor dropping by. "Evening," she said, almost sheepishly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Michael blinked. "Honestly, I'm more surprised you found the place. GPS finally decided to be helpful?" "Actually, I asked someone at the general store. Nice lady named Martha threatened to drag me here herself if I didn't come say thank you." That sounded like Martha. Olivia hesitated. "Look, I wanted to say it in person. Thanks again for helping me this morning. I've been thinking about it all day. Most people wouldn't have bothered." Michael shrugged, still holding the door. "Would have been a rough morning to leave you stranded." "Still," she said, "you didn't have to, so I'd like to repay you. Dinner on me, tomorrow night, you and Lily both." He hesitated. A fancy resort dinner wasn't exactly their scene, and part of him didn't love the idea of stepping into her world on her terms. But then Lily peeked around the corner, curious as ever. "Is that the lady from the pretty car?" she whispered. "Not nearly quiet enough." Olivia laughed. Guilty. Michael looked from Olivia to Lily, who was now smiling so wide her cheeks were practically glowing. He sighed. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" Lily shook her head with dramatic certainty. "All right," Michael said, turning back to Olivia. "Dinner sounds fine." "Good," she said, that smile returning. "I'll make sure there's dessert." And just like that, she was gone. Back into the night, leaving Michael with a pot of overcooked spaghetti and a daughter already picking out what she'd wear. Michael had never felt more out of place in his life. The dining room at the Hartley estate was lit like something out of a movie, soft candlelight flickering against gleaming wood panels, a fireplace crackling at the far end, and a table set with real linen napkins and glasses that looked too fragile to breathe near. Michael tugged at the collar of his only decent shirt, suddenly aware of how rough his hands looked against the polished silverware. Across from him, Lily sat wide-eyed and grinning, her legs swinging beneath the chair, sneakers tapping against the polished floor. She had insisted on wearing her fancy dress, a faded purple thing with a missing button at the collar and a small chocolate stain he hadn't noticed until they were halfway through the front gates. "You okay, Dad?" she whispered, eyes darting toward the waiter who had just refilled her water for the third time. "Peachy," he muttered. Then Olivia entered, and for a moment the entire room shifted. She wasn't dressed for a boardroom tonight, no sharp heels or sleek ponytail. Instead, she wore a soft sweater, dark jeans, and a pair of flats that made her look almost local. Her hair was down, loosely curled at the ends, and she greeted them with a warmth that didn't feel rehearsed. "Hope you two didn't get lost," she said as she sat down beside Lily. "Only inside the building," Michael quipped. "This place has got more rooms than our whole neighborhood." Olivia chuckled, and for the next few minutes the conversation settled into something surprisingly easy. Lily talked nonstop about school, her drawing, the inn, and how she wanted to be an architect/pianist when she grew up. Olivia listened, completely engaged, asking thoughtful questions and laughing at every silly story. Michael watched them, a little stunned. He had expected stiffness, maybe even a little performance. But Olivia wasn't acting. She was genuinely connecting with his daughter, leaning in as Lily explained her dream blueprints and giggling when she described how their sink sometimes made dinosaur noises. By the time dessert arrived, apple tarts with cinnamon cream, Michael realized he hadn't felt this relaxed in a long time. And when Olivia caught his eye across the table, candlelight dancing in her gaze, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, this night wasn't a mistake. By the next morning, word had spread through Maple Creek like wildfire on dry grass. It started at the diner, where every rumor in town either began or came to die. Someone had seen Michael's truck parked outside the Hartley estate the night before. Then someone else swore they saw him and Olivia Hartley having dinner through the windows, looking real cozy under the candlelight. By the time he stopped in for a coffee, the whispers had already hardened into suspicion. "Big city's moving in, huh?" Earl, the grizzled mechanic from 2 shops over, muttered as Michael passed his booth. Michael gave a polite nod, grabbed his to-go cup, and didn't stay long. He wasn't in the mood to explain things he wasn't sure he understood himself. Back at the workshop, his phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Dinner was lovely. Lily is amazing. Hope your day's going okay." He read it 3 times and didn't reply. Not yet. Because while part of him was still replaying her laughter from the night before, another part was feeling the ground shift under his boots. By lunchtime, 2 more people had stopped by just to say hi, which meant, of course, checking if he knew anything about the historic inn deal or whether he was getting chummy with the Hartley woman to secure a job when the resort started swallowing up the rest of town. Michael didn't blame them. Folks in Maple Creek didn't have a lot, but what they did have, they protected fiercely. The Willow Glen Inn wasn't just an old building. It was part of the fabric that held the place together. And now the person most tied to its future had shown up in town with a smile, a silk scarf, and the attention of their most trusted handyman. That night, after tucking Lily into bed, Michael stood by the window, watching the cold wind move through the trees. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Olivia, shorter this time. "Everything okay?" He didn't answer. He didn't know how to explain that his heart was starting to drift in her direction, even as the town he loved quietly began to turn against it. The next day, Olivia showed up at Michael's shop just before noon, unannounced but not entirely unwelcome. She wore jeans again, designer probably, but they had a trace of dust on them, and a navy coat that looked more suited for city streets than cracked sidewalks. Michael was under the hood of an old Ford when she called out his name. "Thought you might be ignoring my texts," she said, a little tentative. Michael stood wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Wasn't ignoring, just thinking." She nodded. "Fair enough." Then, after a pause, "I was wondering, any chance you'd show me around today? The real Maple Creek, not the brochure version?" He studied her face for a moment. She looked sincere, curious, not calculating. "All right," he said, grabbing his jacket. "But you're buying lunch." They started at the edge of town, driving slow through the quiet streets as Michael pointed out spots that didn't appear on any map, like the tree behind the elementary school that every kid tried to climb before fourth grade, or the little brick building that used to be a movie theater back in the 60s. She listened, really listened, as he talked. He took her to Main Street, where the storefronts were mismatched and faded, but full of stories. The barber waved from inside his shop. A couple of retirees sat on the bench outside the library, giving Michael a subtle once-over when they saw Olivia beside him. He pretended not to notice. At the diner, she insisted on splitting a slice of cherry pie, and he gave in even though he usually avoided sugar in the middle of a workday. The waitress, Karen, raised her eyebrows at Olivia's presence, but kept her voice friendly as she poured their coffee. After lunch, Michael brought her to the old covered bridge at the edge of town. It creaked underfoot, just like it always had. The river below moved slow and steady, catching the sunlight between ripples. Olivia stood at the center of the bridge, looking out over the water. "I had no idea," she said quietly. "No idea about what?" "That a place like this still existed, one where people wave just to be kind." Michael leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets. "Yeah, we're small, but we hold tight." She turned to him, and for a second, all the distance between their worlds felt like something that could be crossed. "I get why you love it here," she said. And for the first time, Michael let himself believe she might mean it. The bridge was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in your bones and makes you forget the world beyond the trees. But Olivia didn't seem to notice the peace around her. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, gaze fixed on the water below. Michael didn't speak, just waited. He'd learned that sometimes silence opened more doors than questions ever could. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, but not fragile. "You ever feel like you're just holding up a house with broken walls, hoping no one notices the cracks?" Michael glanced at her. "Every day." She let out a short laugh, but there wasn't much humor in it. "That's what the Hartley name is right now. Big house, big image, and crumbling behind the curtains." He stayed quiet, letting her continue. "My father left the company to my brother and me when he stepped down 2 years ago," she said, her eyes still on the water. "But the truth is, it's been bleeding money for longer than anyone wants to admit. Bad investments, too much expansion, too fast. The Willow Glen acquisition wasn't just a whim. It was pressure from the board, from investors, from my brother." Michael leaned against the railing. "And from you?" She hesitated. "Not at first, but lately, yeah. I've been trying to fix things, keep the image afloat. Sometimes that means making decisions I don't feel good about." He looked at her, like buying a piece of history, and turning it into a spa. She nodded slowly. "Exactly like that." There was a pause between them, a breath of cold air and something heavier beneath it. Olivia turned toward him, her expression raw for once, no polished mask or rehearsed lines. "I didn't expect to come here and care about this place, about what it means to people, but now that I do—" She shook her head. "I don't know how to protect both, the company and this town, and I'm running out of time to figure it out." Michael studied her for a long moment. Maybe the answer's not in saving both. Maybe it's in choosing which one deserves saving more. She looked at him, eyes shadowed with truth. And he knew she was starting to see what he'd always known. Money built walls, but it never built roots. The next morning brought with it a gray sky and the damp scent of last night's storm still lingering in the air. Michael pulled up to the Hartley estate just past 9, toolbox in the back of his truck and his old thermos, riding shotgun. He hadn't planned on spending the day fixing fences for a luxury resort, but Olivia had called the night before, her voice tired but hopeful. "The wind tore up half the back line," she'd said. "Thought maybe you could take a look." He'd said yes before she finished the sentence. The back property stretched farther than Michael expected, bordering a wide open field where deer still wandered through in the early morning mist. The fence, a mix of old posts and newer reinforcement, was leaning awkwardly, 2 sections on the ground completely, their rails snapped like matchsticks. Olivia met him at the edge of the field, her boots caked in mud, sleeves rolled up like she had something to prove. "You didn't have to come out so early," she said as he stepped out of the truck. Michael grabbed his gloves. "Early's when the work gets done." They started slow, working in rhythm, Michael pulling and replacing cracked boards, Olivia holding them steady. She asked questions and he explained the basics, occasionally teasing her when she dropped a nail or cursed under her breath. "I don't see you swinging hammers in boardrooms," he said, half smiling. "I'd probably get more done if I did," she shot back, brushing hair from her eyes. They moved down the fence line, hands dirty, laughter slipping between them like sunlight through cloud cover. Around midday, Michael pulled out his battered thermos and offered it over. "Coffee?" he asked. She took it gratefully and sipped. "Wow, this is terrible." Michael grinned, adds character. They sat side by side on the tailgate of his truck, boots resting in the damp grass. Olivia leaned back, eyes on the hills in the distance. "You know," she said, "this is the first day I've had in a long time that didn't feel like a performance." Michael looked at her. "Then maybe you're finally in the right place." She didn't say anything, but the quiet that followed said enough. The sun had dipped low behind the hills by the time the last board was nailed into place. The wind had calmed, leaving the air still and cool, the kind of quiet that invited old memories to stir. Michael and Olivia sat on the tailgate again, this time not talking, just watching the sky change color. She passed the thermos back to him, now empty. "That fence looks straighter than when it was new." Michael gave a tired shrug. "It'll hold, at least until the next storm." They fell into silence again. Olivia picked at a fleck of dried paint on her jeans, then glanced sideways. "Can I ask you something?" Michael nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "You said once, you know what it's like to hold up something with cracks. Was that about Lily, or something else?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was holding something fragile. "My wife," he said quietly. "Her name was Rachel." Olivia sat up straighter, her face softening. "She died 3 years ago. Car accident. Middle of the day, nothing dramatic, just wrong place, wrong time." She didn't speak, just waited. "We were together since high school," he continued. "Built everything together. The house, our routines, the way we raised Lily. After she passed, I kept thinking I had to keep it all going exactly the same, like if I changed too much, she'd disappear for good." Olivia's gaze dropped to her hands. "I still hear her voice sometimes," Michael said. "When I pack Lily's lunch, when the sink leaks, that laugh of hers especially, I don't think I'll ever stop missing it." His voice cracked at the end and he looked away, blinking hard. Olivia reached out, resting a hand lightly on his. "You don't have to explain. I can see how much you loved her." Michael nodded, jaw tight. "Still do. Loving someone doesn't stop just because life does." They sat there in the growing dusk, her hand still resting over his, not out of pity, but quiet understanding. And for the first time in a long time, Michael didn't feel like he was carrying the weight alone. The evening air had a crisp edge, the kind that hinted at winter's approach even though fall still clung to the trees. Maple Creek's town square was quiet at this hour, the last bit of sunlight painting gold across the brick storefronts and the faded white trim of the courthouse. Michael walked beside Olivia, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his stride slow and easy. Olivia matched his pace, her scarf pulled snug around her neck, cheeks rosy from the cold. They had met outside the diner, both arriving by chance, or maybe something more deliberate, neither wanted to name just yet. After a few moments of casual conversation, Michael had offered to walk her through the square. She said yes without hesitation. "This place reminds me of something out of an old movie," Olivia said, glancing at the lampposts where someone had already started wrapping garland for the upcoming winter festival. "It's got this heartbeat, like the town breathes with its own rhythm." Michael smiled softly. "It's not fast, but it's steady." They passed the bakery where a closed sign hung crookedly in the window, and the bookstore next door where a string of paper snowflakes fluttered behind the glass. Olivia stopped to look, leaning close to read a handwritten note taped beside the door. "Local Authors Night, December 12. All are welcome." "Do you come to things like that?" she asked. Michael shrugged. "Used to. Rachel loved book nights. I mostly just help with setup now." Olivia's expression softened, but she didn't press. Instead, they walked on, their footsteps echoing quietly off the storefronts. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime clinked lazily, and a faint scent of cinnamon drifted from the direction of the corner cafe. They stopped at the fountain in the center of the square, where the water had been drained for the season. Olivia leaned against the edge, looking up at the string lights hanging above like stars caught in motion. "Being here with you," she said quietly, "makes everything else feel far away." Michael looked at her, really looked. Her walls weren't just down, they disappeared. And for the first time, he allowed himself to wonder what it might be like to reach for something again. Someone. "Yeah," he murmured. "Feels like the world slowed down just enough to breathe." And in that stillness, something shifted, unspoken, undeniable, a quiet promise forming beneath the fading light. The living room was quiet except for the scratch of crayons across paper. Lily sat cross-legged on the rug, her tongue poking out in concentration, surrounded by a sea of colored pencils and half-finished sketches. The late afternoon sun filtered through the window, casting warm gold across her small hands as she carefully added the final touches to her newest drawing. Michael was in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes and humming along to an old tune on the radio. Olivia sat on the couch, a cup of tea in her hands and a worn throw blanket draped across her lap. It was her third visit this week, and the rhythm of their evenings had started to feel natural, like she wasn't a guest anymore, but something else entirely. Lily looked up suddenly. "Olivia, want to see what I made?" Olivia set down her tea and smiled. "Of course." Lily scrambled up and trotted over, holding out a thick piece of drawing paper. Olivia took it gently, and her breath caught as she looked down. It was a picture of the three of them, Michael, Lily, and herself, standing in front of the Willow Glen Inn. The inn was charmingly crooked in the way only a child's hand could make it, with ivy crawling up its brick facade and twinkly lights drawn in yellow crayon along the windows. Michael stood tall, wearing his usual ball cap. Lily was smiling, arms stretched out wide. And Olivia looked different, softer, happier, real. "I did the lights like the ones from the winter festival," Lily explained. "And that's us helping save the inn. I gave you a clipboard because you're the boss." Olivia laughed, her throat tight. "It's perfect." "There's more," Lily said, running back to the pile. She returned with another sketch, this one of Olivia sitting at a picnic table in the park, reading a book while Lily played nearby. The caption at the bottom, written in careful block letters, read, "Miss Olivia is our friend." Olivia stared at the drawing, something fluttering in her chest. Later, when Michael walked her to the door, she was quieter than usual, thoughtful. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "She sees me the way I wish the rest of the world did." Michael smiled gently. Maybe that's because she sees the truth. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Maple Creek, Olivia wondered if the mission that brought her here was worth finishing at all, or if it was time to start rewriting it entirely. The black SUV rolled into Maple Creek just after noon, its polished frame standing out like a sore thumb among the dust-covered pickups and weather-worn sedans parked along Main Street. Michael noticed it immediately from where he was replacing a porch railing on a client's front step. He watched as a tall man in a tailored coat stepped out, phone already pressed to his ear, looking around the town like it was something he'd forgotten to brush off his shoes. Nathan Hartley had arrived. It didn't take long for word to reach Olivia. She found him in the Oak Hollow lobby, pacing in front of the stone fireplace, voice sharp as ever. "Nathan," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. He turned, a tight smile on his face. "Olivia. Thought I'd check in personally since your updates have been, let's say, vague." She folded her arms. "I didn't know we'd gone back to surprise inspections." "I wouldn't call it a surprise, just good business, especially when our acquisition is suddenly on hold, and you're busy playing house with the locals." The jab was sharp, and Olivia flinched, though she didn't let it show. "The Willow Glen isn't a standard buyout. It has layers." "Layers?" Nathan scoffed. "It's a fixer-upper with sentimental value to about 40 people and no long-term ROI. We either renovate and rebrand, or we offload it." Olivia stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "It means something to this town, Nathan. You'd know that if you bothered to walk more than 20 feet from your car." He narrowed his eyes. "And what about Michael Bennett? You spending your days with a small-town handyman now, instead of managing our portfolio?" Olivia's jaw clenched. "Michael helped me when I was stranded, without asking for anything in return. He's decent, and he sees what this place actually is, not just what it can be flipped into." Nathan shook his head, laughing coldly. "You're letting your heart cloud your judgment. Maybe for once that's not such a bad thing." He stepped past her, tapping at his phone again. "Just remember who's actually holding the checkbook. You've got until the end of the month, Olivia. Then we decide, emotion or profit." As he walked away, Olivia stood frozen in the grand lobby, heart pounding. She wasn't just at a crossroads. She was about to fight a battle, one that would decide not just the fate of an old inn, but the woman she wanted to become. It started with a busted water heater. Michael had swung by the Willow Glen Inn on a quiet Thursday afternoon, responding to a call from Mrs. Halpern, the longtime caretaker who still lived in the small cottage behind the main building. The heater had gone out again, second time this month, and she'd insisted she didn't want those Hartley people sending some out-of-town technician who didn't know a thing about century-old pipes. Michael didn't argue. He liked the inn. He'd been coming here since he was a boy. Weddings, bake sales, that one awkward prom, and there was something about the creaky floors and arched windows that felt like stepping into a memory. After an hour and a few well-placed knocks with a wrench, the heater rumbled back to life. Mrs. Halpern, ever grateful, insisted on making him tea. "Go on," she said, waving him toward the front parlor. "Sit a spell while I put the kettle on." Michael wandered into the old sitting room, lined with dusty bookshelves and lace curtains yellowed by time. On the coffee table sat a leather-bound ledger, cracked at the edges, a long-forgotten record book of some kind. Curious, he flipped it open. Inside were handwritten entries dating back over 100 years, guest names, events, expenditures. But deeper in, tucked between faded receipts and notes in elegant cursive, was something else. A certificate. Registered Historical Landmark, State of Missouri, designated 1983, structure protected under Heritage Preservation Code 421. Michael stared at it, heart skipping. He flipped further and found the application paperwork, stamped and signed by the local historical society. The designation was real. And not just symbolic. It carried restrictions. The building couldn't be significantly altered or repurposed without community approval and oversight. Any attempt to gut or rebrand it would require a public vote and layers of red tape. His pulse quickened. He snapped photos of every page and tucked the ledger gently back into place just as Mrs. Halpern returned with 2 chipped mugs of tea. "You find what you were looking for?" she asked, setting the mug down. Michael offered her a slow smile, something sparking behind his eyes. "I think I just might have." The walls of the Hartley Estates private conference room were lined with sleek glass and polished wood, modern, cold, and as unwelcoming as Nathan Hartley's expression. Olivia stood across the long table from him, her hands braced against the edge, knuckles white. The room felt smaller than usual, tighter, like the air itself had turned against her. "This isn't just another property," she said, voice low but steady. "The Willow Glen Inn is a part of this town's identity. We can't treat it like another blank canvas to be branded and flipped." Nathan didn't look up from his tablet. "I'm not interested in sentiment, Olivia. I'm interested in profit margins. Renovation starts in 6 weeks. "No," she said firmly. "We can't. The building's protected. Historical designation filed in 1983. It's not just paperwork. It's law." That made him look at her. "And where did you dig up that little gem?" "Michael found it," she said, chin lifting. "In the original ledgers." Nathan scoffed. "Oh, of course, the handyman to the rescue." "He's the one who actually bothered to look," she shot back, "while you were too busy measuring square footage for a spa." His jaw tightened. "You've always been emotional when it comes to business. That was fine when Dad was running the show, but I won't let your feelings tank our holdings. This isn't about feelings, it's about respect. For the people who live here, for what this place means to them." He stepped around the table, closing the space between them with that same cool, calculated energy he'd perfected over years of boardrooms and acquisitions. "Let me make this simple. If you keep interfering, if you stall this project one more time, I'll petition the board to freeze your authority. We'll dissolve your stake and move forward without you." Olivia's breath caught. "You'd cut me out." "If I have to." There was a beat of silence. Then Olivia straightened, eyes locked on his. "Do it," she said quietly. "But if you think I'll stand by and watch you tear down something this town loves, then you've forgotten who you're dealing with." Nathan shook his head, exasperated, and turned away. "You've lost your edge, Liv." "No," she said, voice ice cold. I finally found my line." And this time she wasn't stepping back. Michael was already pacing when Olivia found him behind the shop, just outside the garage doors, where the scent of oil and cold steel lingered in the air. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the lot, and his jacket hung open, forgotten in the heat of whatever thoughts had gotten hold of him. "I heard about the meeting with Nathan," he said the moment she approached. "Word's traveling fast." Olivia crossed her arms, suddenly on edge. "Then I'm sure you've also heard I stood up to him." "I heard you almost stood up to him," Michael replied, eyes sharp, then walked right back into that estate like nothing had changed. Olivia flinched. "That's not fair." Michael took a step closer. "Isn't it? One day you're defending the town. The next, you're dining with the man trying to gut it." "I work with him, Michael. I can't just disappear. I'm trying to navigate this without burning everything down." "Maybe something should burn," he snapped, more bitter than he meant to sound. "You say you care, but you're still part of the machine pushing all this forward." She stared at him, stunned. "You really think I'm just playing a role? That none of this we meant anything real?" He hesitated. That pause was just long enough to wound her. Her voice dropped, quieter now, but edged in pain. "I let you in. I let Lily in. I didn't have to. I could have stayed behind my gate and kept pretending this town was just another dot on a map, but I didn't. Because you made me feel something real." "And that's exactly why this hurts," he said. "Because I do believe you care. I just don't know if that's enough to stop what's coming." The silence between them stretched, thick and tense. Somewhere down the street, a wind chime clinked softly, too delicate for the moment. "I'm not your enemy, Michael. And I'm not your project, well," he replied, voice low. "I'm just a man trying to protect what little he has left." They stood there, two people in the middle of something that had once felt simple, now split by fear, pride, and a town hanging in the balance. Then Olivia turned and walked away. No door slamming, no dramatic goodbye, just a slow, painful step backward. Lines had been drawn. Neither of them knew what side they'd end up on. The days that followed felt longer than usual. Michael went through the motions, fixing leaky sinks, patching fences, replacing a faulty light switch at the elementary school, but everything felt slightly off, like his life had shifted out of alignment by a few quiet degrees. He hadn't seen Olivia since their argument. No calls, no texts, just a stretch of silence so complete it settled in his chest like a weight. She was still in town, technically, but word had it she'd moved out of the main house at the estate and was staying in one of the guest suites, alone. People noticed, of course. Maple Creek had eyes in every window and ears in every shop, but no one dared ask too many questions, not about her, and not about him. At night, Michael found himself staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd been a fool. What did he really think would happen? That a woman who flew private jets and signed seven-figure deals would suddenly trade that life in for pickup trucks and PTA meetings? That she'd want to stay in a town where the biggest excitement all year was the winter festival and the occasional power outage? He thought about her smile, the way it softened when Lily talked about her drawings. He thought about the way Olivia had sat on the porch steps, laughing over a cup of terrible coffee like it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. It hadn't felt like pretend, but now with every day that passed without her voice, the doubt crept in. Maybe she had come to her senses. Maybe she realized this town and this life were just detours on a path too grand for someone like him to follow. Maybe their connection had been real, but not real enough. One night, after putting Lily to bed, he sat on the porch in the dark, wrapped in the quiet sounds of crickets and far-off traffic. He held the thermos she'd once laughed at, still dented, still half full, and he whispered into the night, not expecting an answer, "Was I just another story you'll leave behind?" It was Saturday morning when Michael found the envelope. He'd been picking up around the house, nothing major, just sorting through the usual clutter that built up over the week. School papers, unopened mail, and a trail of crayon drawings that Lily had left on nearly every flat surface. The envelope was tucked between two of her sketchbooks on the dining table, addressed in neat, blocky handwriting, to Miss Olivia. Michael paused, the weight of it heavier than the paper suggested. He sat down slowly and unfolded the single sheet inside. Lily had written it on her favorite pink stationery, the one with little stars along the border, and though the words were simple, they landed like a punch to the gut. "Dear Miss Olivia, thank you for coming to our town. I liked when we ate pie, and you told me my drawings were really good. I liked that you didn't laugh when I said I want to be an architect and a pianist. Most grown-ups do. Thank you for helping my dad smile more. He doesn't do that a lot. I think you're brave, not just because you wear high heels on gravel, but because you listened. Most people don't listen to this town. But you did. You saw how special it is. I hope you come back or stay. I think you belong here more than you know. Love, Lily." Michael stared at the letter for a long time, the words swimming on the page. He thought about everything he hadn't said to Olivia, how scared he was, of change, of loss, of wanting something again. He'd let that fear drive her away. And in doing so, he'd missed what Lily had seen so clearly all along. She didn't just care about the inn, she cared about them. He looked out the window, past the porch, toward the hills that hid the estate from view. For the first time in days, he felt something shift in his chest, something not quite hope, but not far from it either. Lily's letter was never mailed, but maybe it didn't need to be. The Maple Creek Town Hall hadn't seen this many bodies packed into its creaky old pews since the water tower nearly tipped during a windstorm 5 years back. The space buzzed with uneasy energy, half curiosity, half tension, as neighbors leaned over to whisper and glance toward the front of the room where the mayor, Harold Whitman, adjusted his glasses and tapped his gavel twice on the worn podium. "Folks, settle down now," he said in his gravelly voice. "Tonight we're here to discuss the future of the Willow Glen Inn and the recent purchase by Hartley Estates. Everyone will have a chance to speak, civilly." Michael sat near the back at first, hands folded, jaw tight. He hadn't planned to say anything. He wasn't one for speeches or spotlights. But as the comments started, familiar voices laced with anger and fear, something inside him began to rise. "I don't care how much money she's got," said one man. "You let her stay, and next thing you know, the whole town's a parking lot for city folks in yoga pants." "She smiled real sweet, but don't they all?" muttered another woman. "It's always the same. They buy, they build, and they break what made the place worth something to begin with." Michael stood before he could stop himself. The wooden floor creaked beneath his boots as he stepped into the aisle, heads turned, a few eyebrows raised. He cleared his throat. "I don't usually do this," he began, voice steady, "but I've heard a lot of folks talking about Olivia Hartley like she's some machine sent here to wipe this place clean." He paused, eyes sweeping the room. "But I've seen her walk Main Street. I've watched her listen, really listen, to people most outsiders would ignore. She's eaten our pie, braved our sidewalks and heels, and she's sat on my porch drinking terrible coffee just to hear a story or two." A few chuckles rippled through the room. "She's not here to erase us. She's been trying to understand us, and I think we owe her the same." Silence fell, not hostile, just surprised. Michael took a breath. The Willow Glen doesn't need saving from her. It might need saving with her. Then he stepped back, heart pounding, pulse in his ears. And for the first time in days, the tide began to turn. It was late afternoon when Olivia appeared again, quietly, without fanfare, just as the sun slipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of peach and lavender. Michael was outside the shop, stacking lumber by the back wall, when her car pulled up and rolled to a gentle stop. She stepped out slowly, dressed in jeans and a simple navy sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. There was something different about her now, less polished, more real, like the last of the city had been shaken off, leaving someone who belonged more to the dirt roads and porch steps than boardrooms and skyline views. Michael straightened, brushing sawdust from his palms. Their eyes met. For a second neither spoke. Then she smiled, soft and a little uncertain. "You've got a lot of fans at Town Hall." He tried to keep his face neutral, but a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Didn't do it for applause." "I know," she said, walking closer. "That's what made it mean something." They stood facing each other in the golden light, and for a long moment it felt like the storm that had pulled them apart had finally passed. "I wanted to tell you in person," Olivia said, her voice quiet but steady. "I met with the legal team this morning. I'm backing out of the Willow Glen conversion. No spa, no remodel, no corporate brand stamped on the sign out front." Michael's brows lifted. "You serious?" She nodded. "Dead serious. I'm keeping the property under local stewardship, community use. The historical designation gives me room to make it happen, with the town's input, not against it." Michael stared at her, unsure whether to speak or just take her in. This version of Olivia, fierce, clear-eyed, and grounded, wasn't the woman who had first appeared on the side of the road, but she was someone he trusted. "I also—" She hesitated, then exhaled. "I'm not going back to New York, at least not right now." Michael's voice was quiet. "Why?" She looked at him, full and open. "Because I'm tired of living a life that looks good from a distance, but feels hollow up close. And because I think there's something worth staying for here." There was no kiss, no grand declaration, just the truth between them, and the first real start of something that no deal could buy. The knock on the door came just after sunset, gentle, hesitant, like the person on the other side wasn't sure if they'd be welcomed in. Michael opened it to find Olivia standing there, bundled in a coat, a foil-covered casserole dish cradled in her arms. Her hair was wind-tousled, and she looked less like the head of a luxury estate and more like someone trying. "I wasn't sure what to bring," she said, her voice soft. "So I went with the most Midwestern olive branch I could think of." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Is that tuna?" "Chicken and rice," she replied with a small grin. "But don't get excited. I burned the first one and had to start over." He didn't say anything at first, just stepped aside to let her in. The house smelled like wood polish and cinnamon. Lily had clearly lit one of her scented candles again. Olivia walked in carefully, like she was entering something fragile, and set the casserole down on the counter. Lily peeked out from her bedroom and gasped, "Miss Olivia!" Olivia's eyes lit up. "Hey, superstar." Lily rushed over and wrapped her in a hug. Olivia bent down, closing her eyes briefly as if absorbing the moment, then looked up at Michael again. "She's the brave one in this family." Michael leaned back against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "She wrote you that letter, didn't she?" Olivia nodded. "I read it 3 times. Then I cried like an idiot." He gave a dry smile. "She has that effect on people." A silence fell between them, weighty, but not hostile. Olivia stepped a little closer. "I was wrong," she said, "about a lot of things. About how business works, about what matters, and about what I thought I needed to protect." Michael's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. "It wasn't easy, watching you walk away." "I know," she whispered, "and I'm not asking you to forget it. Just maybe let me earn back the space I lost." He looked at her for a long beat, then down at the casserole. "Well, you showed up with dinner, so you're at least halfway forgiven." Her smile returned, hopeful this time. Real. And just like that, they sat down at the table, not to fix everything, just to begin. By Monday morning, the living room floor was buried beneath papers, blueprints, and half-drunk mugs of coffee. Olivia sat cross-legged on the rug in sweatpants, her hair pulled into a messy bun, glasses sliding down her nose as she reviewed a zoning map for the 4th time. Michael sat on the couch above her, flipping through a notebook filled with scribbled notes, costs, and community input from his last visit to Town Hall. "This isn't just a renovation," Olivia said, tapping her pen against the margin. "It's a reimagining. If we do this right, the Willow Glen becomes more than a building. It becomes ours." Michael leaned forward, bracing his elbows on his knees. "But it has to belong to the town, not the Hartley name, not a corporate brand." She nodded. "That's the idea. A cooperative, owned by local shareholders, run by a town-elected board." He gave her a look. "You're talking about giving up control." She smiled. "I'm talking about giving it back." It was a bold plan, but piece by piece it started to come together. They mapped out spaces for community events, kept the ballroom intact for weddings and fundraisers, and even reserved a reading room for the local library's overflow. The 2nd floor would hold guest rooms restored to their original charm, and the old garden out back would become a public park and seasonal farmers market. Michael couldn't remember the last time he'd been this excited about a project. What he didn't know was that Olivia had already arranged a private grant through a shell fund, quietly securing the capital needed to get the cooperative off the ground without drawing attention to herself or her family. She didn't want credit. She just wanted it to happen. "I'll be part of the board," she offered, "but not in charge. Just another vote at the table." Michael looked at her, eyes soft. "You sure about that?" "I've never been more sure of anything." And just like that, the project wasn't hers or his. It was theirs, a bridge between 2 lives that had never meant to collide, and now refused to be torn apart. The days blended into nights, and the nights into something quieter, slower, softer, the kind of silence that came not from distance, but from comfort. Olivia and Michael had started meeting at the inn every evening after work, sometimes just to go over floor plans, sometimes just to be near each other. They were supposed to be building walls, Instead, they were tearing some down. One night, after Lily had gone to bed and Michael had brought over a thermos of his now infamous terrible coffee, Olivia sat on the floor of the old Willow Glen ballroom, legs stretched out, hair loose around her shoulders. The moonlight filtered through the dusty windows, casting silver across the hardwood floor as she reviewed notes on the community ownership proposal. Michael joined her, sitting beside her with a soft grunt. "Ballroom's quieter than I remember," he said, sipping his coffee and wincing at the taste. "Still can't believe people danced here in tuxedos." "Give me 10 minutes and a speaker," Olivia murmured, "and I'll prove they still can." He smiled, watching her as she made a small note in the margin of a budget draft, lips pursed in concentration. He'd never met anyone so at ease between spreadsheets and sawdust, so elegant and grounded at the same time. She caught him looking and tilted her head. "What?" "Just thinking," he said, voice low, "about how you ended up here." "By getting lost," she replied with a faint grin. "On the road in my life. I guess I needed a detour." "And now?" he asked. She looked around at the ballroom, then back at him. "Now, I think the detour might have been the real road all along." He didn't say anything. He just reached over and handed her the coffee. The next morning they were back at the inn by sunrise, still half laughing about the terrible blueprints Olivia had accidentally spilled tea on. Michael showed up with real coffee this time, strong, hot, and just barely drinkable. They didn't talk much that morning. They didn't have to. Because somewhere between evening sketches and early morning sips, something had begun to shift. Not in a rush, not with fire, but slowly, steadily, like something worth building. The Winter Lights Festival had always been Maple Creek's quiet crown jewel. It wasn't flashy or grand, no ice sculptures or parades, but every December the town square came alive with string lights, laughter, and the smell of cinnamon and pine. Kids raced through the snow-dusted streets with mittens half on, and local vendors handed out cider in mismatched mugs that warmed your hands more than your throat. This year, though, it felt different. Brighter? Fuller? Maybe it was because of the music drifting from the bandstand, or the way the newly restored Willow Glen Inn glowed just down the road, its windows lit with soft golden light. Or maybe Michael thought it was because of the woman walking beside him, her hand grazing his, her cheeks flushed from the cold and the quiet thrill of being seen. Olivia wore a wool coat that matched the deep blue of the winter sky. Her eyes sparkled with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. She greeted people by name now. They greeted her back. "Pretty good turnout," she said, sipping hot cocoa from a paper cup. Michael nodded. "You're a big reason for that." She looked over at him, smile softening. "I didn't think I'd ever be a part of something like this." "You are," he said simply. "You've earned it." As the band shifted into a slow waltz, couples began to gather near the fire pit at the center of the square, where a patch of cleared pavement served as the dance floor. The air was crisp, the stars sharp overhead. Michael hesitated. Then, with a breath, he offered his hand. "May I?" Olivia looked at it, surprised. "You dance?" He smirked. "Not well, but I've got good boots and better intentions." She laughed, genuine and warm, and took his hand. They moved slowly, without rush or choreography. Just two people swaying under the lights, the music threading between them. Around them, the town kept moving, children laughing, vendors calling out last orders. But for a moment, the world narrowed to this small space, this shared breath. He pulled her a little closer. She didn't resist. And beneath the stars and string lights, Olivia Hartley and Michael Bennett danced, not like strangers from different worlds, but like two souls that had finally found the same rhythm. The letter sat on Olivia's desk for 2 days before she signed it, printed on crisp ivory paper with the Hartley Estates letterhead embossed at the top. It was the kind of document that usually traveled with lawyers, assistants, and conference calls. But this one had been written by her, and her alone. No input from Nathan, no suggestions from the board, just a quiet, deliberate decision etched in ink. She read the first line one more time. Effective immediately, I resign my position on the Hartley Estates Executive Board. The words looked heavy, but they didn't feel that way. Outside the window of her guest suite, the view stretched over Maple Creek's rolling hills and snow-flecked rooftops. She could see the Willow Glen Inn in the distance, glowing softly in the early morning light. It looked exactly the way she remembered it the first time Michael had pointed to it on the horizon and said, "That's home for a lot of people." She hadn't understood then. She did now. With a breath, Olivia signed her name, folded the letter into an envelope, and tucked it into her coat pocket. She drove out to the post office herself, no assistant, no town car. Just her, in her own vehicle, with snow crunching beneath the tires and music playing low on the radio. Inside, she handed the envelope over with a steady hand and watched as the clerk placed it in the outgoing mail bin like it was just another piece of ordinary life. And maybe that was the point. When she walked out, the sky was beginning to lighten, streaks of pink brushing the clouds. She found herself driving toward Michael's house without even thinking. The roads were familiar now, comfortable. She parked in front and just sat there for a moment, watching as Lily ran across the yard, scarf trailing behind her like a comet. Michael followed a few steps behind, laughing, his voice carrying across the crisp morning air. Olivia smiled. She had once thought power meant presence, being in every room, making every decision, holding every string. But standing here, watching this little slice of life she'd nearly passed by, she realized something truer. Real power was presence of heart, and she had finally chosen a life that felt like hers. Simple, honest, grounded, and she wasn't going back. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of an email. Olivia was standing behind the inn's new front desk with Lily, helping her glue paper snowflakes to a holiday display board, when her phone buzzed. She skimmed the subject line, Hartley Holdings, Asset Transfer Filing. And her stomach dropped. The file attached wasn't just any asset transfer. It was a full motion to reclaim operational control of the Willow Glen Inn under an emergency clause buried in the original acquisition paperwork. A loophole. One Nathan had known she'd never think to check, because she trusted him once. Michael found her on the back porch a few minutes later, the paper snowflake still clutched in her hand, forgotten. "He's trying to take it," she said, her voice flat. "He found a way to override the cooperative charter. If he gets it approved, he can force a reversion clause and convert the property. Fast." Michael frowned. "What does he think this is? A game?" She looked up at him, eyes fierce now. "It's not just business to him, it's about winning." "Well then," he said, crossing his arms, "maybe it's time we show him who he's messing with." The next 48 hours were a blur of town meetings, phone calls, and legal consultations. Olivia dug into county zoning codes, while Michael met with every business owner in a 5-mile radius. Mrs. Halpern brought out the original preservation documents. The mayor issued a formal statement of intent to block the takeover, and Lily, ever the artist, created handmade posters that read, "Save Willow Glen," which the kids at school taped to every lamppost downtown. By the time Nathan rolled into town, sharp suit, smirk intact, the town square was covered in banners, and the community center was standing room only. He walked in like he still owned the place. But Olivia stood waiting, surrounded by townsfolk, papers in hand. "You came here to make a point," she said clearly, her voice ringing through the room. "But we've already made ours. This isn't your win to take anymore." Michael stepped up beside her. "You want to rewrite history? Good luck. We've got it signed, sealed, and stamped by every voice in this town." Nathan's smile faded. The vote was unanimous. The takeover was dead. And for the first time, Nathan saw what Olivia had built, not with contracts, but with trust. A legacy he couldn't touch. Snow fell softly over Maple Creek like confetti from the sky, blanketing the rooftops in powdered sugar and turning the streets into a picture postcard. The newly refurbished Willow Glen Inn stood at the center of it all, dressed in garlands and twinkling lights, every window glowing with warmth and welcome. For the first time in a long time, it didn't belong to a name on a letterhead. It belonged to the people. And they came in droves. Locals streamed through the grand double doors, voices echoing through the freshly polished hallways. Children raced down the main corridor where new art, sketches by Lily and her classmates, hung proudly alongside historic photographs. The ballroom was open, the fireplace roaring, and the scent of mulled cider filled the air. At the heart of it all stood Olivia, her hand resting gently in Michael's, Lily nestled between them in a blue velvet dress and sneakers dusted with glitter. She'd insisted on helping with the ribbon-cutting ceremony and now carried the giant scissors like they were a royal scepter. The mayor gave a brief speech, one that made a few of the older residents tear up. He talked about community, about legacy, about how sometimes the best stories aren't the ones you inherit, but the ones you choose to write together. When Olivia stepped up to the mic, she paused, letting the moment settle. "This town welcomed me when it had every reason not to," she began, voice steady. "It challenged me, changed me, and reminded me what matters most. The Willow Glen is no longer a Hartley asset. It's a Maple Creek promise." Applause thundered through the ballroom. Olivia turned, knelt beside Lily, and let her snip the ceremonial ribbon with a triumphant grin. Michael watched with a mix of pride and awe. The woman he'd once found lost on the side of the road now stood at the center of something she helped save, not by owning it, but by giving it back. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the last strings of music faded into memory, the three of them stood on the inn's front steps, wrapped in scarves and laughter. "This town," Olivia whispered, "it's more than I ever dreamed of." Michael wrapped an arm around her. It always was. You just had to see it from the inside. And now she did. The days after the grand reopening settled into something that felt almost like a dream. One stitched together by laughter in the inn's kitchen, slow walks down Main Street, and quiet mornings with the scent of fresh coffee and pancakes drifting through Michael's house. Life wasn't perfect, but it was full, and for Michael, full was more than enough. It was a Sunday afternoon when he finally did it. The snow had melted into slush, and the first hints of spring were whispering through the trees. He brought Olivia to the old footbridge outside of town, the one where they'd first stood side by side and talked like strangers on the edge of something. This time he held her hand. Lily was off at a friend's house, and the quiet between them felt like its own kind of ceremony. "So," Olivia said, nudging him with her shoulder, "are you going to tell me why you dragged me out here, or is this just one of your cryptic, sentimental handyman moments?" Michael smiled, then reached into his coat pocket. He didn't pull out a ring, at least not yet. What he held was a folded sheet of paper. She took it, brow furrowed. Unfolding it, Olivia read the header: The Maple Creek Community Project, Phase 2. Underneath was a list: restore the old barn behind the inn into an event space, convert the field behind Michael's house into a public garden and playground, and at the very bottom, build something new together. She looked up at him, heart thudding. "Is this?" Michael shrugged, voice quiet. "You changed your life for this town, for me, for Lily. I figured the least I could do is stop pretending like I'm not completely in love with you." Tears welled in her eyes, unhurried and warm. "Michael, I'm not asking for vows or a calendar date, but," he said, "just say yes to staying, to this, to whatever we build next." Olivia stepped in close, wrapped her arms around him, and laid her head against his chest. "Yes," she whispered, "to all of it." And as the wind carried the scent of earth and thawing pine, Michael knew this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of their real story. One written not in contracts or plans, but in love, belonging, and a little town that changed everything.